Hi everyone, good evening, Manish here.
Hey, hi all. Good morning, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My screen is visible.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll continue from yesterday. So who has joined newly today? Someone who was not yesterday. Anyone? Okay. One person. Okay. Okay. We'll do a quick recap of whatever we saw. For the full thing, we have this recording that we did yesterday, right? Yes, we have some WhatsApp group. Please ping Rahul so that he can add everyone to the appropriate WhatsApp group. Right. So we saw what is API testing and the basics, right? What is an API? How does it function internally? The client server architecture. What is a client and what is a server? And we also saw an example about how these are working in tandem to get the data from a database, right? So where are these databases would be typically located in a real-time scenario, and how the server is up and running and how the client gets the data, right? We saw with an example. And we saw about the infrastructure part as well, right? How does it work in real time? What's load balancer, AWS, and security groups, your internal IPs, networks, and all those things. Right? So we'll continue from where we left, right? So initially we will be like working with a particular API, right? I'll show what is that. So there is a website called Open Weather Map. So it is an just an open source data, which provider, which has the APIs to actually get the weather of a particular city given its city name. Right, these are one of the APIs that will be focusing initially to understand the APIs and all. Right. So I have already signed up for this website and got my key. For example, let's say if we wanted to newly sign in, go to this openweathermap.org. I'll post a link here. Right, go to this website and go to sign in. Right, and click on create new account and give your username, email, and password. Right, and you'll be getting like a new username and password. Once that everything is done, sign into your account. Just a minute. Okay. So if you once you signed in, right, you can go to the profile and go to this my API keys, right? So there will be an API key generated for you. So just make a note of this, right? In future, we'll be using this API key. So my API key will be looking something like this, right? And post that, if you go to this link called API section, so it will give you what are the APIs that it is actually providing, right? So there are a few types of APIs you can use. For example, look at this API, right? Current weather data, right? And if you see here, what is the description? Access the current weather data for any location, right? And it is available in JSON, XML, or HTML formats. And if you go to this API doc, so it will have an option of like how to call this particular API, right? So how to call this API? You should hit this api.openweathermap.org/data/2.5/weather, right? And you have to pass the query parameters in terms of latitude, longitude, and the API key, right? This is one way of doing it. And these are the parameters that this particular API is allowing, right? And this will be the sample response, right? Once everything is appropriate, this will be the sample response, right? And one more thing. So this is one such API, right? So if you wanted to do by giving us a city name, that is also one of the option provided here, correct? So api.openweathermap.org. So you can pass the city name in the query parameter and the API key. So where is this API key? This API key is actually coming from my account, this particular API key, right? So similarly, it has few other APIs. Maybe check it out, right? So all you have to do is sign up for this account and post that with the email ID and the password, sign in, get your API key, and go to this API section and find the relevant doc to get the current weather of the particular city by giving it city name and API key, and you are good to go. If you want, just explore other APIs in this particular thing, right? So you have a hourly forecast, daily forecast, right? And bulk download. So now here, who is responsible for getting this weather data? This open weather map is responsible, or we rely upon this open weather map to get the weather data, right? So by using this type of API only, have modeled our own API engine by storing this data in our own database, right? It's just a replica of this, right? Now, we rely on open weather map to get the data, but is it the responsibility of open weather map to actually monitor all the data across all the location on Earth? No, right? So now who actually does that job? Who actually monitors the weather and all those things? It's a weather department of the respective state or the country, correct? So again, what that open weather map does, it queries or it has the API contract with the weather department to get the weather data from the weather department, right? And in turn, we are using this open weather map to get the data. So here we are the consumer, who uses Open Weather Map, and in turn, the Open Weather Map is going to fetch the information from weather department across the globe, right? Now, there can be some other end user for this particular consumer, right? So I may create one more service on top of the weather Open Weather Map to be able to serve my own customer with or without a charge, right? So it propagates, the API call continuously propagates to one system to other system to get the final data out to whatever the end user uses the system, right? So here there are multiple levels of how the data is coming from the particular for this particular use case. So if you see here, right, I have used the particular API, api.openweathermap.org. This is the same document structure that we have that is given by this example, right? So we have this URL, right? And in the query parameters, we are passing city name and API key. So if you see here, we have this, here we have queried for Mumbai, correct? City name and the API key, right? And we are getting the data. So yesterday what we did, when we are running this from our own server, instead of this, what we did, instead of passing api.openweathermap.org, we pass localhost API.
Localhost.
Correct. Why localhost? Because the server is running in my own computer. Now, the server is in some other remote system, and we are accessing that server via this domain. Correct. That is the only difference here. Correct. So if that is clear, the understanding the rest of the thing should be clear. Right? So now this DNS is resolved to an IP address, and then the IP address knows which load balancer to hit to go to the which server, right? And it goes and fetch the data. Maybe this data is stored in the Open Weather Maps database, or it is not. The Open Weather Map will in turn go to the weather department and gets the data and returns it back to the end user, right? Now we'll try to like analyze this URL, right? Just wanted to stress on the components of this particular URL, right? So in this part, right, whatever highlighting, what is this called? This is called protocol, correct? So here HTTPS is called protocol. Protocol through which we are actually communicating with the server, right? Now, what can be different types of protocol? HTTPS is Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. HTTPS. HTTP. This Hypertext Transfer Protocol is SMTP, correct, for mail servers. FTP, correct, right? So I can access my access the server through any one of this protocol. HTTP or HTTPS is not the only norm, right? I can access through SMTP, FTP, right? And there is something called WSS. Anyone knows about this? So WSS stands for WebSocket Secure, right? So you have your WhatsApp web bundle, right? It uses WSS protocol. I think people from my last session would have. I'll just show you. So we have something called Chrome Developer Tools, correct? So if you right click on any web page and inspect, it will open the elements, or if you want to open directly, click on Control and F12, right? So what this Chrome Developer Tools does actually. So it helps us to debug what is happening in the backdrop when we hit a particular URL, right? So let's clear this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open WhatsApp web, right? So if we see here, I just clicked on this WS part, right? And if I click on all, everything will be open. All the network calls that was made to actually open my WhatsApp will be open. But if I click on WS, some WebSocket will be open. Can you see? Can you see this is the main chat window, and its status code is 101, that is green, right? And it's a get method, and it is not HTTP HTTPS, it uses WSS protocol, right? So now where this WSS comes into picture, why WhatsApp uses WSS instead of HTTP HTTPS? Any answers? So secure connection, no, data encryption, no, those are not the answers. This WSS stands for WebSocket, S stands for secure, how we have HTTP and HTTPS. So whenever there is yes, then that means it is secure. So like I think Abhijit has had the answer, right? Partially correct. So whenever there is a chat, it's not a one-way communication, correct? Typically, how an API works. So it works only when a client makes the request, correct? So client has to make a request to the server and the server responds, like yesterday how we saw. So we are making the request to particular openweathermap.org and to get the data, right? So with how this request is made, if you see here, I'll open the network tab again. If I hit this API, right, one more time, one network call will go, right? Can you see? One network call has gone, right? What call has been triggered? API.openWeatherMap with a particular URL. Get call has been triggered, and the response status code is okay. And the payload we passed as a query parameter, right? And the response will be able to preview and all those things, correct? So it is we who are triggering the request, right? But there are certain scenarios where the server has to push the data back to the client, right? So the chat window is one such an example, right? It's a two-way communication enabler is something called WebSocket, right? So if there is a new message for you, so the server also has to push the message back to you, correct? Yes or no? So for all these purposes, right, we have to have a two-way communication channel open, and WebSockets enables the two-way communication, right? So whenever we send a particular message, right, to a particular person, right, the WebSocket, we will trigger the API call to the particular WhatsApp server, and it will know which chat window to redirect to, right? And whenever someone sends the message to you, right, now it has already know the WebSocket connection ID and all, right? It has opened the WebSocket for me in this particular device, right? So yes, this connection is open in this particular device, right? And also in my mobile where the WhatsApp is installed, right? It knows where to push the message. It will have this WebSocket connection until the connection is, if a connection is terminated, new WebSocket connection will be open, right? So the server pushes the message back to the client so that I will receive the message without even polling, right? So other way that you can do is you have to without WebSocket, what you have to do, you have to constantly poll the server, correct, to get the data. So if there are any new message, you have to poll, and if there are new message, you have to again hit one more request to get the data, right? So to avoid this, all the nuances, WebSockets were introduced. Chat application is one such example. Similarly, we have so many use cases, right? So if we see this Chrome developer window, there are so many useful things also that we can able to see. So apart from if we go to the headers tab, you will see the section where you can get all the header information, right? Request headers, response headers, right? Okay, I will talk about the like structure of an API request a little later, but you can get all the insights here, right? So how much time it took to actually get this data, right? When the connection started to when the connection was terminated, how much time it took. Everything you can monitor here. If there are any cookies associated with this particular API, you can monitor that here and so on. So this is very, very useful in that sense, right? And every data that is fetched from a server, right? It will have different types of content, correct? For example, you see here, just clear this and hit this one more time. So if you see the in the all tab, there are only two API requests that has went to this, correct? One is the actual request, one is that favicon, right? Favicon is nothing but the icon or small icon you see here, correct? It's a favicon. So what's a shortcut key to see code? Code, I don't understand what you mean by code. If you want to open this,
Sir, basically this chord and I in this brackets, like they were this should be a like a web page, open web map. You must have clicked something through which we are able to see the CORD, weather ID,
this
and all.
one, no?
Like inspect, if we click on inspect, we see a different thing that is the lower bottom. Yeah, this thing, this code.
So you see the basic structure of this particular web page, but if you go to network, right? So I'll
No,
just show more
above
time.
one. Yeah, this one I'm asking. This base, main, temp.
So if I right click on inspect, right? Basically that structure of this will be open, right? Yeah, if I go to this network tab, this particular network tab will be open.
So the above panel where it is CORD, what is the? I'm asking about this. Yeah,
Oh, this one.
how
This is
we
the
see this? Yes.
no. This is the response of the particular web page, right? Response of the particular URL that you are seeing in as a JSON format. And actually, I have installed one plugin called JSON Formatter so that you are seeing in a formatted form, right? So if I hit this same URL in my Firefox, just a minute. So if you can see here, right, Firefox has a different way of
Yes.
showing the same data, correct? And if you see the raw response, you can just click on this raw data here. So this is the actual response we are getting, right? And so that's what I was also coming about. So even if you see the raw response here, right, this is the actual raw response we are getting from this particular API request in the form of JSON, correct? So, but generally a web page is a combination of multiple things, right? Here we are only getting JSON as a response, right? We hit this, right? You see here, go to the preview or even the response, right? This is a pure JSON data. And that JSON data is interpreted by the browser and displayed in the particular format that you are seeing here, right? Formatting is done because of the JSON formatter. And by default, Firefox has certain formatter inside this, right? So we are able to view the data like this, right? But let's take an example of Google.
So just
Generally,
one query before you go further. The data which was there in the page, yeah, this is like latitude 19.0144. We used to provide in our programming, or it is the user inbuilt in the web page. I could not understand.
okay, see, any API request can give different types of response, correct? Or forget about the different types of response. An API can give a JSON response, correct? When I hit an API, so it can give me a JSON response. That's correct. I mean, you're able to understand, right? And that JSON response is
Yes.
displayed in the web page. The browser is
Okay.
interpreting this JSON response and using this extension, it is displaying this response in this format, right? So these data are actually coming from the Open Weather Map server. So if you see here, right, in the API doc, so that's a specification they are giving, no? So if I hit this API, what will be my sample JSON response they have given? The JSON response will contain CORD, the weather information. There'll be key called base, there'll be key called main, visibility, wind, rain, and clouds, and everything is there, right? This is the sample response that you can see from this API doc. That is the same thing we are seeing here, no? CORD, weather, base, main, visibility, wind, all those things, right? So this is the data that is coming from which server? The Open Weather Map server. That much you are able to like agree, right?
Yes.
So now who is giving me the response? Open Weather Map is giving me the response, right? So I can see, hey, he is only defining that API contract. If I hit this API, you will get the response in this particular format, and the format will be of type JSON, right? In the case of Open Weather Map. And that is what I'm seeing here. If I hit the right URL with the right query parameter, I'm able to see the response in a JSON format, and that is the contract that they have honored. Correct? So, is this fine, or you are trying to understand how generally we see some web page contents and all, why JSON is coming here? Is that your question?
Well, no, my question was just like when we go to the open map, so the code which gets generated that is there in it, so we are providing input to it, or is it captured from the UI? Like a customer, like a person comes and he wants to check the map and then he hits the website. So just these figures I could not still understand. Is it a user provided or it is already filled? Yeah, these
I mean,
ones.
these are the data, these things.
Yes, sir.
So, if you see here, no, these are the coordinates for a city Mumbai, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And these are the temperature currently for the city Mumbai, right, in Fahrenheit. So where this data will be? This data will be in the weather department, correct?
Okay.
With the weather department, correct? So someone from the weather department, it's not a manual process. Again, there are temperature sensors, and let's say the weather department in Mumbai is monitoring this weather, right? And that will be that weather that is interpreted will be stored in their servers, correct, automatically, or in their databases automatically. Now, what this Open Weather Map does, whenever we request Open Weather Map for the particular city called Mumbai, it goes and queries the weather department, right? And gets the data from the weather department for the city Mumbai, right? And displays the information in a format that it provides with the coordinates and for the Mumbai city and the weather information. And it is currently haze, correct? It's not clear, it's a haze, and what's the wind speed and all. So everything it is filling in this particular schema format, and it is giving back to me. So this data is actually coming from the weather department, correct?
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So is this clear? Or so just that weather Open Weather Map gives us a clean way of viewing this data, right? By saying, hey, CORD means coordinate. Coordinate will contain latitude and longitude, right? And 72 degrees longitude and 19 degrees latitude is the coordinate for Mumbai city, right? Similarly, the main is nothing but the main data. We are requesting for weather only, right? So what is the temperature in Fahrenheit? What's the minimum temperature, maximum temperature, right? Pressure, humidity, and all those things. So this data is something which is filled by the weather department, and in turn, Open Weather Map gets the data for us once we request them. Okay, there are a few more questions. So similar to hitting API in Postman, correct? So the data doesn't have to necessarily be a web page that you are seeing here when you hit the google.com website, right? It can be a simple response like a JSON also. So Get API is public API, as there are normally not a security threat for the provider. I mean, if you talk about the Get API and all, right? See, I have the API key, and what is, I mean, I don't understand what security that what you mean by here. It's an weather information is not any sensitive information as such, correct? It's not a private information of a particular person, right? So it doesn't have to be like, so only, even though this is an API key, which they provide for me to just to understand how the API works, right? Still, I'm showing you, and it is passed in the query parameter instead of the request header, because it's not sensitive information, correct? So there is, I don't see any security threat as such. And generally, Get API calls works in this way only, right? Based on get parameters, we are getting the response is correct. So these are the query parameters we are sending to Open Weather Map, right? So if it understands Q means inside this key called Q, we have to pass the city information. And in the key called app ID, we have to pass the API key. Let's say I'm putting a wrong API key, right? Instead of 89, I'm just 88, some typo or something like that. So what it says 401 unauthorized, right? We'll see about the status code. It says 401 unauthorized and invalid API key, right? And what happens if we put a wrong city name? So instead of Mumbai, just put some XYZ, right? Wrong city name. What happens? Then it says 404, right? City not found. Right. So then we have to understand, we have to give the right parameters in the query parameter, then only we'll be able to get the data. In the query parameter, you're passing app ID where you're getting the value. I showed in the beginning. So once I registered for this particular website, no, I can go to my profile in my API key section, right? You can get the API key. This is the API key I'm currently using for the particular API to fetch. Right.
Sir, can you please repeat how to generate the key?
So one key will be generated for you, right, automatically. So just sign up to this website, right? And like once you log in with your email ID and password, just to go to Open Weather Map. It's posted the website, I think. Maybe I'll post it one more time. Just go to this openweathermap.org. And there will be since I've signed in, my name is shown here. There'll be option to sign up if you haven't signed, right? Sign up for that and give your email ID and password. And once your thing is created, your account is created, you can sign in with your email ID and password and go to your profile and click on my API keys. One API key will be automatically generated for you. And you can choose to generate some other API key for like if you for your own purpose. I don't think it is necessary for our use case as such, right? We can use the existing API key, whatever is given by the account, and I will be able to use. Fine, right? Any other questions with respect to this content? Why we are seeing it? How we are seeing it? We can also generate the API key from Postman. How we will be able to generate an API key from Postman for something which is authorized by the Open Weather Map? Yeah. I don't understand the query exactly. So see, this API key, who is authorizing this API key? Is it us or is it someone, right? Who is authorizing? So the provider, right? Open Weather Map is authorizing, right? So we cannot generate the API key externally, right? So they might have some logic like this. I showed you a sample code, correct? So yesterday they are going to parse your query parameter, something like this, and they are going to evaluate. This is a simple implementation of how that code might be. We don't know their code, but how that code might be, right? So if the app ID is not equal to the app ID that is generated for you, right, then it will throw the response status exception that you are unauthorized, invalid API. Right? This is how the checks will be there in the backend server. So that if you give a wrong API key, which is not generated for your account, then it will throw the error. I've already shared the website. Open weather map. Can you just scroll up and you can see? Yeah, someone also said it's possible. It's not possible because Postman is the client, right? A provider or a server or who is providing this service can only generate the API key for it. And yes, we'll be using this app ID in the Postman as a query parameter, right? We'll see when we come to this Postman, we'll see those sections. But yes, we will be using the same API key provided by this open weather mapping inside the Postman, not something that we generate from ourselves. So that point, I think, should be clear, right? So just think of like someone is actually reading this data that you are sending here, right? This URL. Server will be able to read all the data, right? The URL information, header information, request body, and everything, right? And it will be able to take a decision whether to process your request or not, or what type of data that you wanted to process, right? Here, the server understands the city that you wanted to get the weather data for is Mumbai, and API key through the query parameters that you pass here, right? Again, coming back to the main section, right? I mean, so far, is it okay, or is this clear why we are getting this data? Any other queries? Okay. So, but the case will be different when I hit a google.com. Here, the case is simple and straightforward JSON weather data, JSON data that we are getting. But Google is, if I hit google.com, what will be the output? It's a web page, correct? And if you see, there are so many API calls that are going to load a simple web page like Google, correct? What is the web page? Just giving me a Google home page. But if you see here, there are so many things that are happening in the backdrop. So when I hit google.com, the first call that goes is the google.com itself, right? It's a get API and the status is 200, right? And if you see these are the requested headers and the response headers, right? So if you see the content, what is the content of this? Can anyone say what type of response that we received here? Is this JSON content, or what type of content is this? Actually, the content type is here.
HTML.
Here, right? It's an
HTML.
HTML content, right? The thing I am highlighting here. So only if you go to the preview, right, you can see the HTML. That is, HTML is what? HTML is responsible for loading your structure of the web page, correct? There are three main components of any web page, right? The HTML, and what are the other components? CSS and JS, right? These are three main components of any web page, right? The HTML is responsible for the structure of the web page, correct? And what is the CSS responsible for?
For the styling
Formatting
of
or
the
styling. Styling is the right word, right? How it has to look, what color it has to have, in what area of the page it has to go, right? Look and feel, yes. Styling or look and feel. So this gives a structure and this gives the styling. Then what is JS? What is JavaScript responsible for? The actions, right? Functions or action. It provides the function to a particular web page, right? Here, what is a function? It's a simple Google page. No? What can be the functions here? So we all know, if you see here, right, we got the web page structure here through HTML and all. That is fine. And we have certain CSS also fetched for us, right? If you go to the CSS section, you can see the CSS call. And some CSS is generated for us, which gives a style to this web page, right? And what is the function of this web page, Google web page? Correct. Search button, right? If I hit on search, if I type something, right? IPL, like something, it is able to throw the result, right? And it is giving us the results from the possible matches, right? If I click on search button, it is actually doing something for me, right? It is searching for me something and giving it back to us, correct? So these are the function of a particular website, right? If I click on this, it will open my microphone to actually here search by voice, right? If I click on this, it will take me to the upload window to search by image, correct? So these are the functionality of the website, which can be enabled only through JavaScript. HTML will not do that. CSS will not do that. These are possible with help of JavaScript, correct? Now, if you see here, yes, event handling, all those things is handled by JavaScript. So if you see here, the images are loaded in a separate API call. This is my profile image, correct? Where this image is seen, this image is seen here. If you go to this Google website, can you see the image, the HTML page, the image section is empty. But whereas the image is loaded for me in the actual web page. How it is loaded? The image is loaded because there's a separate API call happening to get the image, right? This is the API call that is going to fetch the image for my profile, and the image is displayed, correct? Here the content type will be image. So the content type is here is image, right? Here image and JPEG. So I can preview the image here, right? Response will be binary response. You can see something here. And how this image that is coming from this API response goes here, goes into this top right corner in a circled format. CSS does that, correct? So whatever you see in this web page, the content is actually loaded by individual web calls, right? Individual API calls. So here the API call response is HTML response. Here the API call response is an image, right? And yeah, all the pieces of the content are put together, and entire web page is rendered for you through the combination of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? And if you go to JavaScript section alone, you can see how many JavaScripts are there for this particular web page alone, right? It's a simple web page, but you can see actual source code. So this much functions are there actually to actually render this simple Google web page for us. So each JavaScript is loaded by a particular API call, right? This is a different call. This is a different call, right? So there are different technologies. Yes. So now currently we are mainly dealing with like MVC, right? Model View Controller. So forget about the different technologies. Just to understand like how it works in a end-to-end basis, right? Now, if you see here, the first API call we are triggering, correct? If you go to the all section, yes, this source code is a client source code, correct? The client side source code is always open, and you cannot protect the client side code, right? But what actually matters is the server side code, which is processing this data, correct? So I can generate a similar web page, Google-like web page. I can also create if I want. But can I provide a Google-like search functionality for the user? I cannot, because that is very huge collection of data, and which is actually processed by the Google servers, right? So server side actually matters, client side doesn't matter actually. In terms of anything, client is just something which is owned and controlled by a user who is using the particular client, correct? That does not matter. Now, if I see here, I just made only one API call through my browser. If I clear this again, I'm hitting enter, right? I'm just making one API call only, but there are so many API calls subsequently made, so that we get the image and we get the JavaScript files, we get the CSS files. But who is making the all other API? I'm just making only this API call, correct? I'm hitting google.com, clicking on enter. This is a GET call. And we got the status as 200 and everything is fine. Who is doing the rest of all these calls? Oh, yes. So when we load this particular web page, right? This particular web page will have certain JavaScript. If you see here, no, there's a script tag. And there are certain things that it does, correct? So when I load this web page, this JavaScript will be executed. And this JavaScript does all these subsequent API calls, trigger and getting the data, getting the CSS, loading this and everything, right? This is taken care by this script inside this particular web page, right? And these are this JavaScript only makes subsequent API calls, so that we will get a coherent single web page for us to render by the browser. I hope that point is clear, right? Now coming back to our section, right? Now we understood what's a protocol, right? Protocol is something which is defined by the server, right? And we'll be able to access that content by defining the right protocol, followed by what is this? So we understood HTTPS is protocol, and this is URL, no URI, or I can put it in a different name called domain. Can I call this domain information? Uniform resource identifier, or for a simplicity sake, I can call this domain, correct? Here, the domain is something which a particular domain owner, right, or a website owner registers himself with a domain service provider like GoDaddy or Google or Amazon or whatever it is, right? And he purchases the domain, and he'll be able to use the domain by providing some EA records. So that is a big topic in itself. Let's forget about that. So if I want to register some name on my website like karthik.com, karthikabc, or karthiktrainer.com, something like that, I'll be able to do that, correct? And this information will be eventually resolved to a particular IP address, right? Once you register your domain and set the EA records for those and all those things. So let's concentrate on only the API structure here. This is called domain information. And what is this called? I will call this as a domain, right? OpenWeatherMap.org is domain. What is this API doing here? API is subdomain. So every main domain, I can create a subdomain, correct? You might have seen so many structure of like domain, something like this, some xyz.abc.com, something like that, right? It will be usually in subdomain and domain format, right? So the entire thing is called domain information, or in technical terms, URI, Uniform Resource Identifier. Correct. Any questions? And what is this called?
Endpoint.
Endpoint. Correct. So endpoint is something which we define. We means creator of this server defines, right? Here, if you see the sample server code, For this get call, I have defined an endpoint called /data/2.5/weather, right? Only when you use this endpoint, the control will come to this particular method, and whatever inside this method will be executed. If you see, there is one more endpoint called /health, right? So the local host is still running. I'll show you, right? Local host 8080. So hit /health. What is message it's returning? Health is fine, right? Why it is able to return? Because I have defined an endpoint called /health, right? So only we are able to define that here, right? And what is the thing that I've asked you to return? If this /health is called, the control will come to this particular method. And what is there in this method? Just return health is fine, right? So only it is returning as a web page, health is fine, right? So this endpoint is something which is defined by the provider or the server, correct? So if I use /data/weather, by seeing the code, can someone say me what will be the response of this endpoint? What I've done here? So it will directly
return the weather of Coimbatore.
Return the weather of Coimbatore, right? I'm not passing any city name as such here. If I just put the /data/weather, it is directly turning me the Coimbatore's weather, right? Why? Because we are asking it to do in that way once this endpoint is triggered, correct? So every endpoint will be linked to a certain method, will be connected to a certain method in the server side code. Once the endpoint is hit, that particular method will be called. Okay? That is how a server works. It's as simple as that. We don't have to complicate that. So when this is the endpoint which is provided by the open weather map, right? /data/2.5/weather. And once this endpoint is identified by the server, it will know which method to execute, and by reading the query parameter, and it will pass that query parameter information to the as a context to the subsequent method calls to get the data from a database or from another service or so on. So this is the endpoint, and finally, whatever comes after this question mark, right? What is this?
Query
Parameters.
Query parameters, right? The structure of query parameters will be always a key followed by a equal to sign and a value, right? So if you cut this down and put it here, this is one query parameter, right? Q is equal to Mumbai. And this is another query parameter, right? Key and a value, which is actually splitted by equal to sign. Okay? And we can add multiple query parameters in a URL by providing this ampersand symbol as a connector, right? And whatever you are putting after this question mark will be treated as a query parameter. It's a key value pair. Here the key is Q and value is the city name. Key is app ID, value is this. But the question comes, right? Why the key has to be Q? Who is defining this? It is defined by the server again. Correct? Because if you see here, how the endpoint is defined by the server, query parameter is also defined by the server. Here in the sample code, right? I'm expecting a query parameter with a key called Q. Also, I'm expecting a query parameter with a key called app ID, right? If I give some other key name, it will throw the error. Correct? So these are also defined by. So let's see what happens when I change the key here, Q to X or something like that. It shows 400, right? Something went wrong. So it should be always Q. Server expects Q, correct? So the question is endpoint is a DB name? It's not a DB name, right? It is just an identification that we give for the particular, a meaningful name or meaningful identification we give So that particular endpoint will trigger a method with a context of what it does, correct? I'll just break down this endpoint for you, right? Why they have named this endpoint as data 2.5 weather and all? What is this data? Data we obviously know. This is a weather application. So we are going to get the data, right? Some data we are going to get, right? And this data is going to be of weather, right? And what is this 2.5? 2.5 is version, correct, right? Version of the particular endpoint, right? Why we need a versioning? There can be some other version called 2, or there can be some other version called 1.5, right? It can be, correct? Why we need a versioning of an API? Changes, to track the changes, correct? Correct. So 1.5 might have a different response with different keys, different set of values, right? 2.5 version we are using, it is providing the information in this particular format that we are seeing, right? Maybe in maybe in the one version, some keys might not have been there, like maybe the wind speed or clouds might not have been there. They would have added this in the version 2 or 2.5, right? Yes, the response payload changes, right? And why we are again we are tracking the changes, and why it is important, right? To track the different changes in your response, we are using versioning and all, or even tracking the changes in the request, we are using versioning. But why we have to track the changes? Can I not directly you change without tracking it? What will be the impact? As an API tester, it's important to know this. Imagine this API is used by let's say at least over 100 clients, and they would be parsing this response based on the API contract that you defined, right? What if you suddenly change this contract? You added a field or removed a field, right? Their entire system will break because they would have parsed this in a certain way that you have defined before, right? So if you say without change everything without notifying them, or change everything in the same version, right? The clients who are consuming this data, everything will be a broken experience for them, correct? Suddenly nothing will work in their end. At the end of the day, who generally, if you think about any large servicing companies, right? At least in Amazon, what we are doing is, when I'm working in Alexa division, right? So when a person interacts with Alexa, it has to identify who you are, right? You can go on Alexa, who am I? It will say you are this particular person in this particular account, right? How it is able to do that? It has to identify who you are based on your voice. That voice profiling will be done by one service, and it has to go and fetch your account information and your name information from another service, and it has to put together this information, and there is another third service which is going to stitch all these information together and giving a text data which is eventually converted back to your voice and given back to you, right? So there are multiple API calls which propagates back and forth. What if suddenly one of the services decides to change the API contract all of a sudden, and when you ask Alexa like who am I, it will give you total different response which you will not even expect, right? It will be a broken experience for the customer, right? The impact will be very, very huge for a large systems. So because of that purpose, we want to track this data, what changes we are making in API, everything should be versioned. And if a client is using that version, it has to be left it as it is. If you are changing, create a new version, and maybe ask the client to migrate to the new version. Those are called those are also called migration projects, right? One of the type of example of migration. Migration can be of any form. A type of example of migration is asking the client to migrate from one version of the API to another version, correct? And that is why this endpoint is important, versioning is important, right? I can map data /3 / weather to another method that is going to perform another different set of tasks for it. So now we understood how a server actually reads this data and gets the query parameter and process this data in the background, right? With this small example. So again, continuing, right? So we saw the different types of data, correct? The request can be of few types, a response can be of few types, right? It doesn't have to be a JSON format, it can be a JSON, or it can be an XML response, it can be an HTML, we saw it. HTML, it can be a text, it can be an image, it can be even a video format, right? If you go to Postman, yes, sorry. So if you see here in header section, right? So there can be XML, ECMAScript, JSON, JavaScript, XML, PDF, YAML, right? Zip file, graphical format, MP4, MPEG, right? MPEG is a video format, right? WebM, GIF, JPEGs are images format. So it is not only one type of response an API can return, correct? If you go to this content type and check for the alternatives, there are so many types of request and response or the format you can play with, right? You can even upload something to some websites, right? How you're able to do that? Let's say you're uploading your image, you're uploading your video. All these are called binary files, correct? So it will be uploaded as a binary file for you, right? With a proper JPEG or MPEG or whatever video format it is, right? So next thing we need to understand is there is no universal like only one format kind of thing when we are operating with an API. API can work across multiple formats, right? The universal standard for creation of the API. There are certain standards definitely we need to follow, right? For example, let's say there is some system where you have to, let's say there's some system called student service for a college. So let's say this particular service is responsible for maintaining all the student related information, his profile or its marks across different years and different subjects, right? Let's say this service provides that, right? So the initial thing would be like what you wanted to do. First thing this service has to offer is to enroll a student, right? Enroll the student into the service. For that, what API we will create? We'll create a post API, right? We'll come to this post and all. But post API is something which is used to create something, create a resource inside the server and or in the database, correct? And generally, let's say my college is xyzcollege.com, right? And how we'll be designing the endpoint here? The endpoint can be as simple as student, right? And if I wanted to post something in the request body, I'll give the information, all right? Let's say name. Here the request body is in JSON format. And let's say age. So this is how generally we define an API, right? And if I wanted to get the student information, how my API design would be, how my endpoint would be. There might be two wide alternatives, right? Either I can query the student. And let's say if I'm enrolling the student with the post API, an ID will be generated for me, right? Let's say that ID is 1, right? With ID is 1, I can design an API, something like this, right? For get request. For get kind of request, what I can do, I can design endpoint something like this, right? /student/1, which is a get call, right? Can I pass this one as a path parameter, right? With the ID of 1, right? If I pass this response will be returned for me, right? Will be the response. Right? Or what can be the other way through which we can design this endpoint? Any answer? Can I pass this ID as a query parameter? Possible, no? Here I'm passing as a path parameter. But can I do something like this? Copy this and instead of /1, I'll use question mark. ID is equal to 1. Possible, right? Get request. So these are some few standards through which I can design an API. So you can actually, as a like API tester who are in the project, right? You can raise the bar. If it's /1 means what is the reasoning? Is it really scalable? Or if it's passed as a query parameter means what are the implications? Is it scalable, right? So path parameter is generally passed as a part of this path itself, as a part of this endpoint itself, right? This is not a part of any query parameter, correct? It's a part of the endpoint itself, right? You can design an endpoint like that. But what is the implication of doing something like that? You'll have to design an API. Let's say if we wanted to query a particular student, right? By querying for more than one parameter, right? Now, in that case, what will happen? You have to actually pass already design the API something like this, right? And you have to pass the ID here, and in the query parameter, you have to pass the second criteria. So these are again different design choices, correct? And if I pass as a query parameter, I can add multiple query parameters here instead of passing as a path parameter. Right. So at the end of the day, there is no right or wrong answer. It depends upon how your system is going to scale and who is the user. Is it really right worth of this effort or something like that? Those are the design choices we need to take. So nowadays, what happens is like when your profile is loaded, nowadays you don't even get your ID in the path or query parameter, right? But irrespective of that, your profile will be loaded, right? How it is done. The same logging into my Facebook, right? By default, it is not going to ask me to sign in because I've already signed in and I've checked the check mark, remember me in this computer. So it's not going to ask me to sign in again. And still it is able to identify Karthik as logged in, and it is taking to me my profile without passing any path parameter or query parameter, right? How it is able to do that? So it is able to do that with help of cookies, correct? Your identity will be stored as cookies, and the cookie will be read by the server, and it will know which profile you are trying to access. Again, it's one of the design choice, right? So which tool we are using to write API requests? Is it Notepad? I mean, this is just for like notes, just to take a note and to explain something, right? This is a Visual Studio Code application that we'll be using just to take notes and explain things. And generally speaking, for API, we'll be typically using Browser or the Postman to hit the API, right? So just to by understanding the anatomy of URL will give us a deep insight about how an API functions on the backdrop. So what exactly is a Postman? I'll give you an analogy. What is a browser here? What's a browser? Here we are using Chrome browser, but what's a browser here, right? It's a client, but end of the day, what it does is a tool, right? It's a tool or an application installed in my computer to able to hit the get request, correct? What the browser actually does, it's a get request and render the response in a web page, correct? That is all it does, right? At the end of the day, main
Yes.
functionality, right? And what Postman does actually, what does a Postman do? If you think on a high level, Postman also does the same thing, correct? Sends a request, gets a response, but instead of rendering as a web page, how it is rendering? Let's hit a Google website itself, right? See, if we hit the google.com, right? Yeah, the browser is rendering a web page for us, right? In the browser window. Same we'll try to do here, right? We'll create a new request. I'll copy this, put it here. It's a get request. We're hitting google.com. What do you think will be the output of this request? Can you see what is the output? It is a HTML output, correct? So this HTML output is not able to make subsequent API calls because this is not a browser, correct? Browser will execute this JavaScript and make subsequent API calls and to get the subsequent results and all those things. But is it a work of Postman to execute this JavaScript? No, it is just executing whatever API request, right? And if you go to the preview section, it will render this HTML page. Can you see again? Can you see it is a Google type of result, right? Without any CSS and JavaScript or any action as such, right? So it will try to render this HTML back for us. So at the end of the day, if you think on a very high level, your browser and the Postman are one and the same. It does the same thing. So, but the divergence comes from a browser will try to execute the JavaScript and in its JavaScript engine, and it will try to render the web page. But Postman doesn't have to do that. It will give you the raw response. And if you wanted to render an HTML preview, it will test it. But the rendering will happen in the Postman window instead of the browser window. That's the only difference. Right? At the end of the day, Postman is also a tool installed in my computer. Chrome is also a tool installed in my computer, right? So both are different types of client through which we can access the internet or APIs, right? So now we are able to understand the high level difference, right? So now if you're understanding this different, then what is rest assured actually? So forget about the details of the rest assured and all, but on a high level, what is rest assured? I mean, maybe if people with some experience, right?
It is a Java-based library
Library to do what at the end of the day? It's a Java-based library just to execute the API.
to test the APIs. Yes.
Testing is additional functionality of rest assured, yes, correct. But on high level, what it does, it is also executing the API, right? How your Chrome is executing, how your Postman is executing, right? At the end of the day, all these are different tools to actually execute your APIs. But the purpose is different, right? The Chrome renders a page so that you can interact with that web page. Postman just delivers you the raw content back as the result. Whereas rest assured will give the same result, but you can actually test the response, request and response, and with the expected and actual result, and generate a result out of it. On high level, the main functionality of all these tools are same. So even what I can do is, I can copy this. You see here what I did. So I'm just calling a command. I just post this command here. This is a command I typed, right? Forget about what is the command, but you see the response. What is the response here of this for this command? What is the response here? The same response that you saw in Chrome and saw in Postman, correct?
HTML.
HTML, right? So again, curl is a utility or command line tool that I have installed in my computer, but it's defaultly available in Mac. I am executing a GET request. It is called xget, right? Execute a GET request with what URL? With this URL, right? So when this is executed, now what happens? The response is rendered in, instead of rendering it in Postman or browser, response is rendered in the terminal window, right? I can use the same curl command. Curl is again a utility, right? It's just a command line utility installed in my computer. So can I call this curl also as a client? That's the same thing, no? So curl is also a client, right? So client doesn't have to be something which you physically interact with. It can be as simple as a code. At the end of the day, what this browser is also doing, it is executing some JavaScript code in the backend to send the request and get the response, but just that you are seeing in a nice UI, right? Same curl command can be used to execute your API.open weather map also, right? Just copy this. I'll just say curl -xget. Okay. Put the quotes. Right. So curl xget, I'm actually adding the entire URL inside a single quote. Now, what is the response? It is again a JSON response, correct? Whatever you see in the browser, whatever you had seen in the Postman, same thing we got via curl command itself, right? At the end of the day, these are like different ways, different tools which works differently, but on a high level, everything is a client. The functionality is the same, correct? So curl is also a client. Agree with me, right? Or is it confusing? Too much information? Yes, you can install curl on Windows, or simple thing would be, I would suggest to install. I think in the latest Windows version, you have this terminal window by default. I'm not sure, right? Or you can use something called git bash. This is a small utility you can install in your Windows computer through which you can execute your Linux based commands. It'll be very super useful. I think in the latest Windows, terminal also comes along with your CMD command prompt, where you can install this curl and everything. So if not, install this git bash. So if terminal is set, then well and good, yes. So here also I'm using terminal only, right? By default, Mac comes with terminal, and if Windows has, please go ahead and use that. So now for GET request, we don't have any other major things, right? Mainly, what are the components of an API request? We saw the breakdown of URL, right? What means what and everything. But on a high level, what are the components of an API request? We contain the URL, right? Entire URL. So in this case, what is the URL? Just the URL, right? And what are the other components of an API request?
Protocol.
I mean, protocol is again part of the URL, right? The method, right? What method we are going to call? HTTP method. Whether it's a get method or post or put, right? Could be part of a request, correct? And someone said yes, request header. Right? Headers, authentication, everything will be a part of either header or query parameter. Request body. Any other thing we left out? So these are the main components of an API request, correct? Along with this, if an API response will contain a response body. And also it will contain few other additional things like, so the part of request and response will contain response body, status code, correct? And what else? The response headers. Time is determined by the client itself, how much time it's going to until the connection is established and the responses got back. Right? So these are the major components, correct? The type is again coming from the response headers itself, request or response headers. So URL we saw what can be the components of the URL and so on. What is this HTTP method used for? It is to say to the server,
What kind of request it is?
yes, right? But why we have to say to a server what kind of someone answers, right? For CRUD operations, right? What is a CRUD? C for create, or for read, U for update, and D for delete, right? So there can be many operations we will be able to do, right? For example, let's take the student service itself that we just talked. An example. How we are able to get a student response without even a student entry here, right? So first we have to create a student to get the particular student's data, correct? So create always takes a priority. This only is CRUD operation. It's not RCUD operation, correct? Even before reading the data has to be present inside the particular service, correct? So we have to create the data, then we can read the data. Then if you want to modify it, you can update the data. Or if you want to delete, you can delete the data. These are the 4 major operations, correct? But why can't we do it in a single name? Why we have to have separate get, put, post, delete? So for better separation of concerns, correct? So if we have a separate get, put, post, delete and everything, it will be easier for us to write a server-side code by implementing all these changes, correct? So if you see here in the code also, right, there is a annotation called @get mapping, which indicates that this API request is coming from a get method. If it is a post method and I'm calling this endpoint, this will not be triggered, right? Because it will check for 2 things. It will check for endpoint and also it will check for what kind of HTTP method is this. Get mapping represents get request, right? So only inside the logic, we are actually writing logic to get the data, right? So if you want to use a post method, there is an annotation called @post mapping, right? If we just can you see it is coming from the Spring framework? There's a method called post mapping. Under this, you will write a certain code so that it will handle the post data, right? So all this can be handled separately in the server side. So only we have different types of HTTP method as standard defined, right? On high level, we can get the data, we can post the data, we can modify the data, we can delete the data, right? To have these operations, we have different HTTP methods, right? There are few other HTTP methods also we'll see in upcoming sessions, right? And why there's a request? What's a request header? We define what is the method. We define the URL, right? What's a request header? Any additional context that we are passing to the request can be tracked inside the request header, right? For example, if you wanted to authenticate any API, right? You can pass the authorization token as a request header, right? Request header is again a key value pair, right? We go to this header section. There is a key, there is a value, right? You can pass a cookie information here, right? And you can pass other useful information, right? Which host, which agent. So let's say you are using some application like Facebook. Now we might have seen, right? A user will track you, and generally, any Facebook or WhatsApp or Instagram, whatever application you use, that particular application will know from where you are logging from, which device you are logging from, right? It will say whether you are an Android or iOS customer. It will know from which location. If you have enabled the location and all, it will know which location it is you are logging in from, right? And also it will know, right? If you're logging in from browser, it will know which browser you are logging in from, right? All this information, even without your consent, will go as a part of your API request where in headers, right? So even the device information, if you're using Samsung or LG phones or Apple, which device, which OS version, everything, all the information will go to the particular server, right? And where it will go? It will go in the request header. And if you wanted to authorize, you can put an authorization token, and that information will go in the request headers, right? How to get header information again? If you see here, this is an API called with triggered, right? In this, if you go to the headers, then you see the request headers. These are the headers that is passed. If you see here, no, with even without my consent, it has sent that this is a Mac OS, right? And it is from Google Chrome browser, right? So without our knowledge, all this information will be collected by the server. Why they are collecting, that's a different topic altogether. But all this information will be sent as a part of request header. And in few scenarios, there are mandatory headers as well. Without that, your request will not succeed. So how, if you see here, right, in the code, how we are able to get the query parameter and the endpoint and all. Similarly, we can also get the request header information and validate whether there are certain information present in the header, like authorization token or something. If that criteria fails, we can reject the request there itself without even processing the request, right? That is also possible in the server. So who defines what headers we need to use? Again, that is defined in the API contract given by the server provider. Generally speaking, if you use Postman, few things might be mandatory, like content type and all those things, right? So without that, most of your modern day applications will not work. Headers are very, very important. So one question, right? Now authorization token, if you see here, there is a separate key called authorization as well, right? We can pass the key here. But here in the open API example, we are passing the authorization in the query parameter instead of request header. Why is that? Why do you think they have designed in such a way? Because whether is not any sensitive private information, even if you use my API key, doesn't even matter to me, right? What information you're going to get out of my account, maximum some other information, right? How does it matter? So for any sensitive information, usually the API key will not be passed as a part of your API or your URL. Why? Because even in your HTTPS request, everything will be encoded, but your URL will not be encoded, right? Your URL will not be encrypted. It is open. Anyone can see the URL, right? Okay. So now, I mean the parameter again, if you see here, right? If I give any request parameter, it will come under the param section. So if I type question mark, let's say Q is equal to, can you see? It is automatically added. I'm typing in the URL, but it is automatically added in the param section, right? So what are params? Query parameter or parameters they mention, that means it's query parameter. In the Postman, you can see under the param section. In the URL, like in any other format, you can see in the URL itself, right? So contract document is provided by client. We use it for testing. Contract document is not provided by client, correct? It is actually provided by the owner of the service or the provider or the server, right? Who defines the contract. So the client has to generally comply with the contract and make the API request and expect the response in the particular contract defined by the provider, right? So client here open weather map says I'm going to give you a response in this particular format. Can I go and say, hey, I don't want this, I want only like this? Technically, I can say yes, but who has to implement it? It is a responsibility of the server or the open weather map to implement that. So the WSDL, it's a SOAP thing, right? You define what kind of structure you are expecting your schema or thing to be. But at the end of the day, it's a design that is coming from the server end, right? And WSDL is not even a thing in REST, right? It's a SOAP concept. It is how open weather map chose to return the response with these keys, with these kind of values. They have only defined that this should be a string value, this should be a double value, this should be integer value. They have defined. Okay, we can stop with this, right? So we'll continue from the coming session. So any high-level questions until now, whatever we saw? Anything anyone? So payload is something which is a request body, which we sent as a part of post and put request. We'll see in the coming sessions. I hope you find this sessions useful and the way of teaching also useful. And you can get the recording from Rahul, correct? And from the coming week, it is going to be the continuation of whatever we saw, along with the syllabus that we had. Yes, for rest assured, we are using Java. Yes, correct. So we'll share the code, everything we'll put in a GitHub and finally share with you. Right. And Postman, again, it is just a workspace. No, you can share using email ID. We'll share everything, not a problem. And automation, yes, we'll see one by one how we can automate this APIs in Postman and then rest assured everything will follow. Post, we detailedly understood the APIs and how it is working in the background. SOAP is again is not so similar to Postman. So UI is a tool, if you want to call it, yes, it's a client, but as a client, yes, SOAP UI is a client. Maybe you can compare it to a Postman, but the SOAP itself is a different concept from the rest. I just wanted to make the difference. Okay, and whatever notes I've taken here is maybe I'll put it in a separate Git file and share. And in the coming week, it's going to be the Saturday, Sunday, same evening 6 to 8 p.m. IST. Right. We'll see, Abhishek, the put pass delete. We'll see elaborately what is what and how it works in the coming section. Right. I'll go into each and everything in detail. And installing we'll do as and when any installation that is required. We'll let you know. We'll do as and when the session comes. That's not a problem. Yeah, for API documentation, we are going to rely on the API docs, which is given by the Postman itself. Swagger is similar thing. If you want to use, you can use. Okay, thank you everyone. Hope everyone had a good weekend and have a nice week ahead as well. Right, and we will see in the upcoming.
Thank you.
Thank you.